Hello. Thank you for listening. This is Joe's near-death experience. Open quote. The 3rd of May, 1969. B Company, 2nd Battalion, 47th Infantry Mechanics, 9th Infantry Division. It was toward the end of the dry season, and my platoon was pulling out. Our mission was simple: drive down the road, show the flag, and make sure that we still had the right of way. The two slowly moving tracks, armored personnel carriers, in front of mine were already kicking up the pulverized dirt road into little clouds of dust. Lady, the platoon mascot, trotted alongside, wagging her tail. She no longer went with us ever since a mine had blown up the track that she had been riding on. I exchanged my cloth hat for a helmet, put on my wire-rimmed sunglasses, and half-cocked the .50 caliber machine gun as we passed through the base camp gate and picked up speed. Lady stopped a few feet beyond the gate and watched us go. Our 4 tracks soon achieved a monotonous but comfortable 40 miles per hour, which created a welcome breeze. To either side of the road, for mile after mile, lay a gridwork of rice paddy dikes dividing the land into tidy rectangles of various sizes. The pale yellow stubble of last season's crop failed to hide the earth in the fields. Separated by cracks an inch wide, the clay soil of the paddies had dried into flagstone-sized blocks. Although the land was flat, the fields did not extend far into the distance, but rather ended abruptly at a ubiquitous wood line. This woods was composed of thick, lush, green napa palm and stood from 20 to 30 feet tall. From no place in the Mekong River Delta could one escape from being completely surrounded by it. Sometimes it might be a couple miles away, and at others only a few hundred feet. It grew where the Delta distributaries were, and they, like a root system, were everywhere. We controlled the larger towns and villages, the roads, the skies, the major waterways, and the rice paddies. The wood line belonged to, quote-unquote, Charlie. With diesel engines roaring and trailing a huge mile-long cloud of dust, the column began to approach one of the spots where the dreaded jungle wall squeezed in on the road from both sides. Instinctively, I began to watch the wood line more closely. All of a sudden, a very large anti-tank mine was command detonated 8 feet directly beneath my little old lily-white ass. I immediately knew what was happening because my track had been blown up just 3 weeks prior to this, and thought to myself, oh shit, here we go again. I was catapulted upwards along with everyone and everything else. People, dust, weapons, ammunition, helmets, and sea ration boxes formed an expanding inverted cone with myself in the middle. On the journey upward, external time decelerated. The rates of the rotations of all of the objects surrounding me rapidly decreased in an apparent violation of the law of conservation of angular momentum. I was fascinated by the unnatural, ever-slowing gyrations of the bodies of my comrades and wondered, is this the end? Are we all dead? At the apex of my trajectory, time stopped completely and an inexplicable calm descended. The state of consciousness that then prevailed was as to the normal waking state as the normal waking state is to a dream. Whatever it was peaceful, omnipresent, temporarily and spatially, omniscient, and absorbed everything in its indivisible whole. In an indivisible whole. End quote. Let me read that again. At the apex of my trajectory, time stopped completely and an inexplicable calm descended. The state of consciousness that then prevailed was as to the normal waking state as the normal waking state is to a dream. Whatever it was peaceful, omnipresent, open parens, temporarily and spatially, close parens, omniscient, and absorbed everything into an indivisible whole. Open quote. The entire universe, past, present, and future, collapsed down to a single center upon which everything depends for its existence. It is that, capital T, which does not change. It is the quote-unquote light of pure consciousness which illuminates all things. It is the ultimate meaning of the enigmatic biblical passage, quote, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Matthew 6:22. It is the great nothing, for it includes all things, and therefore it is itself not a thing. That's how it, capital I, gets to be the all in all, capital A's, all in all. Furthermore, there was, open parens, and still is, close parens, absolutely no doubt as to its authenticity, any more than one would doubt upon awakening from a dream that the waking state is quote unquote real, and that the dream was quote unquote just a dream. In short, God himself took over my reins in the senses that I no longer existed as a distinct entity, only he exists. Therefore, there was an overwhelming feeling of bliss, love, compassion, and strangely enough, a founderant sense of déjà vu. The knowledge obtained that the true home, capital T, capital H, and the true self, both capitals, of all things had been miraculously revealed. The events of my life up to that point were unhurriedly and non-judgmentally reviewed in great detail, not in chronological order, but somehow all at once, although some events were emphasized more intensely than others. Subsequently, I was allowed to exist again. Open parens, there was no choice in the matter, it simply happened, close parens, and was given the opportunity to be aware of anything that I wanted to be aware of, with the understanding that time was not a factor. Indeed, there was, quote unquote, all the time in the world. I proceeded to focus on this or that aspects of my life and concluded that there wasn't too much to be ashamed of. Actually, I made extremely poor use of this gift, but then I was just a naive 22-year-old with a somewhat skewed concept of relative importance. I could see a 360-degree panorama of the road, the wood lines on either side, and the other three tracks of my platoon, two in the front and one behind us. The entire episode seemed to be housed in my head, but I was uncertain whether or not my head was still attached to the rest of my body, although under the circumstances this point did not seem important one way or the other. In other words, I really didn't care if my life was to be snuffed out or not within the next few seconds. I was then gently, but unequivocally, informed that I would survive the explosion without serious injury, and even that I would make it out of Vietnam in one piece. So selfishly, I turned my attention to the immediate situation and very calmly and deliberately concluded that I should, number one, stay conscious so as not to drown in the 2 inches of rice paddy water. Number two, stay loose as to break as few bones as possible. And three, roll away from the track so it wouldn't crush me to death if it tipped over. Only after my mind had run out of things to decide on did time start to rush back in. The transcendental state of consciousness terminated, and I reverted back to the normal waking state. I could see the ground about 20 feet below me and began to fall towards it. I was left with an intense feeling of awe and well-being. Ever since, I have been convinced, with a conviction that precedes even my conviction that 2 plus 2 equals 4, that God is for me. It is no longer a matter of faith or belief, but rather one of knowing for sure, because I have seen him as he is. However, it was a pleasant surprise to discover that he is loving, compassionate, and forgiving, properties which I had not previously made adequate allowances for. I will always be thankful to him for reaching down and picking me up in the palm of his hand, so to speak, at that particular instant. In fact, it still brings tears of gratitude to my eyes, even as I write this 30 years later. Also, I no longer fear death, pain and suffering, yes, but not death itself, because by his grace, this particular raindrop remembers the ocean from which it comes. Unfortunately, the experience of this state is up to God, not down to us. But take my word for it. It is always here, capital H, and now, capital N, and a lot closer than you think. I have never experienced anything before or since which came anywhere near close to being as real and as profound as the state of consciousness which I have feebly attempted to describe. However, my remembrance of it has sufficed to console and comfort me through the vicissitudes of life, especially through the hard times. Sorry, I have not noticed any paranormal or psychic or supernatural abilities with respect to myself, just an unshakable conviction in the reality of something spiritual. If you ever run across a surefire method for reawakening this state within me, without blowing me up or telling me to meditate or on Om for 30 years, please let me know. May God go with you. He will always, but it's a nice thought. There's a couple of questions at the end here. Question: at the time of your experience, was there an associated life-threatening event? Answer: yes, I was the 50 caliber machine gunner on top of an armored personnel carrier track. A very large anti-tank mine, probably one of our own unexploded 500-pound bombs, was command detonated 8 feet directly beneath my little old lily white ass. Question: did you feel separated from your body? Answer: no. Question: at what time during the experience were you at your highest level of consciousness and alertness? Answer: I immediately knew what was happening because my track had been blown up before, just 3 weeks prior to this, although by a much smaller device. I may have blacked out or been sufficiently confused for a fraction of a second, because I do not recall the handles of the 50 caliber machine gun striking me on my lower left jaw, a point that I figured out later. However, after I was airborne, you can bet your boots that I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Question: was the experience difficult to express in words? Answer: yes. The hardest part to communicate is the experience of Godhead. The problem is that when God is present, the individual self is not. Hence to say that I experienced this or I experienced that is absurd. All anyone can really say is that God is here and now, or that he is pure being, or pure consciousness, or the all in all, or the one, or love, etc. By analogy, it would be comparable to trying to explain Schrodinger's equation to someone in a dream whilst being the dreamer of the dream. Close quote. Well, that was a pretty good one. I especially like the life review, talking about seeing it all at once, knowing about it all at once, but highlighting some certain areas. That was great. and then him been given the opportunity to be aware of anything that he wanted to be aware of, with the understanding that time was not a factor. And then, of course, his description of the Godhead at the point when he was up in the air, and then suddenly the calm and peace descended and could have been up in the air forever. And the description of how it changed, how God came in and the human couldn't be there. That was pretty interesting. Thank you for listening.